"You're not even half the woman my mother is," Madison declared across my dining room table, her voice dripping with the same contempt she'd shown me for months. The words hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. I set down my fork, pushed my chair back slowly, and looked directly into her cold blue eyes. "Then she can start paying your rent," I replied with the calm that comes from years of dealing with difficult teenagers as a high school principal. My son Jake froze mid-chew, his face going white as fresh snow. "Rent what rent?" he stammered, confusion replacing his usual passive acceptance of his wife's cruelty toward me. 6 months earlier, when my beloved husband Frank passed away from a sudden heart attack, I thought the worst pain of my life was behind me. Frank had been more than my partner for 37 years. He was my anchor, my voice of reason, and the brilliant mind behind our modest real estate empire. What Jake didn't know, what nobody knew except my attorney and accountant, was that Frank had quietly built a portfolio of 12 rental properties throughout our town over the decades. Frank always said real estate was the one investment that would never abandon us. He started small, buying a duplex when Jake was just 5 years old, then reinvesting the rental income into more properties. By the time he died, we owned apartment buildings, single-family homes, and even a small strip mall. The portfolio was worth over $3 million, generating enough monthly income to support several families comfortably. When Jake announced his engagement to Madison 2 years ago, I was thrilled. My son deserved happiness after his difficult divorce from his college sweetheart. Madison seemed charming at first, bubbly, affectionate, and apparently from a well-to-do family in Nevada. She claimed her mother, Patricia, was a successful real estate agent who had taught her about property values and investment strategies. She spoke confidently about her family's lake house, their multiple cars, and her mother's thriving business. After Frank's funeral, when Jake and Madison were struggling to make ends meet on his assistant manager's salary from the auto parts store, I wanted to help without damaging their pride. Young couples need to feel independent, capable of building their own lives, so I devised what I thought was the perfect solution. I discovered that their apartment building was for sale. The elderly owner, Mr. Peterson, wanted to retire and move to Florida to be near his grandchildren. The building housed 8 units, all consistently rented in a decent neighborhood just 10 minutes from downtown. Without telling Jake, I purchased the entire building for $250,000 through Frank and Ursula Brennan Properties, LLC. Then I became their secret benefactor. Each month, Madison would write a check for $1,800 to what she believed was Peterson Properties Management. In reality, she was paying me. I deposited her checks into my business account, essentially paying their rent myself while letting them maintain the illusion of independence. The arrangement seemed perfect until Madison's true personality emerged. At our monthly family dinners, which I hosted every second Sunday, she began making cutting remarks about my cooking. "My mother's pot roast falls off the bone," she'd say while poking at my carefully prepared meal. She uses a special technique she learned from her grandmother. The criticism escalated to my housekeeping. "Mother always says a woman's home reflects her character." Madison would comment while running her finger along my windowsill, checking for dust that wasn't there. "She keeps her house so spotless you could eat off any surface." Then came the attacks on my parenting. "Mother raised 5 children and they all became successful professionals," she'd announce while Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. She knew how to set boundaries and teach responsibility. The worst moments came when she criticized Frank's memory. "Mother always says a real man provides security for his family's future," she'd say with a meaningful glance at our modest home. She could never respect a man who didn't plan ahead. Each insult felt like a slap, but Jake never defended me. He'd developed a habit of changing the subject or making excuses about needing to get home early. "We don't want to overstay our welcome," he'd say, though I'd never given them any reason to feel unwelcome. The truth was becoming clear. I was subsidizing my own humiliation. Every month, I paid $1,800 for the privilege of being insulted in my own home by a woman who had no idea she was living in my building, eating food I'd paid for, and criticizing a woman whose generosity was the only thing keeping her housed. But I endured it because I loved my son and hoped that Madison would eventually warm up to me. I thought maybe she was just insecure trying to establish her place in the family by elevating her own mother's reputation. I convinced myself that time and patience would solve the problem. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Jake had finally been promoted to assistant manager at Henderson Auto Parts, a position that came with a small raise and better benefits. I'd made his favorite meal, meatloaf with garlic mashed potatoes and green beans, and bought a chocolate cake from the bakery where Frank used to get my birthday cakes. Instead, Madison spent the evening comparing my cooking to her mother's superior skills, criticizing the way I'd set the table and making snide remarks about my old-fashioned decorating style. The final straw came when she announced that I wasn't even half the woman her mother was. That's when everything changed. That's when I decided I was done being a victim of my own kindness. The silence that followed my revelation about the rent stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Jake's fork clattered against his plate as he stared at me, his brown eyes wide with shock. Madison's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then mounting rage. "That's impossible." Madison sputtered, her carefully applied makeup beginning to smudge as angry tears formed. "We pay Peterson Properties Management. I write the check myself every month." I walked to my kitchen drawer and retrieved the manila folder I'd prepared weeks ago, sensing this confrontation was inevitable. My hands remained steady as I pulled out the lease agreement and placed it in front of them. The letterhead clearly read, Frank and Ursula Brennan Properties, LLC, with our business address and tax identification number. "Peterson sold me the building 3 months after you moved in." I explained calmly, settling back into my chair. "You've been paying rent to me for over 1.5 years. Jake picked up the document with trembling fingers, scanning the legal language until he found his signature at the bottom. His face crumpled as the reality sank in. "Mom, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I wanted to help without embarrassing you," I replied. "You both seemed so proud of your independence. I thought I was doing the right thing." Madison snatched the lease from Jake's hands, her eyes darting across the page as if she could will the words to change. "This has to be some kind of mistake. Some legal confusion." "There's no mistake, Madison. I own your building and 11 others throughout town. I've been your landlord since September of last year." The color drained from Madison's face, but her expression hardened rather than softened. "Well, your mother wouldn't need to resort to sneaky tricks like this. She'd help family openly and honestly." Something in her tone triggered my suspicions. After 2 years of hearing about the magnificent Patricia and her real estate empire, her lake house and her successful business, I'd never actually met this paragon of womanhood. Madison always had excuses for why her family couldn't visit for holidays or special occasions. "Tell me more about your mother's real estate business," I said, leaning back in my chair. "What's the name of her company?" Madison's eyes darted nervously. "Patricia Morrison Realty. She specializes in luxury lake properties." "And where exactly is this lake house you've mentioned so often?" "Lake Tahoe. Well near Lake Tahoe. It's a private lake community." Jake turned to study his wife's face, perhaps hearing the same false notes in her voice that I was detecting. "Honey, you never mentioned the name of the lake before." Madison's hands began to shake slightly. "It's called Crystal Bay Estates. Very exclusive. You have to know someone to get in." I nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting. I have a friend who's a real estate agent in the Tahoe area, Carol Winters. Maybe she knows your mother's work." "I doubt it," Madison said quickly. "Mother works with a very select clientele, private sales mostly." The lies were unraveling before our eyes. I could see Jake beginning to piece together the inconsistencies in his wife's stories. His jaw tightened as he studied her face. "Madison," he said quietly, "what's your mother's phone number? I think it's time I actually talk to her." The question hit Madison like a physical blow. Her composure, already cracking, finally shattered completely. Tears began streaming down her cheeks, leaving black mascara tracks on her pale skin. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." "What to go this far?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the truth. Madison buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "My mother doesn't live in a mansion by Lake Tahoe. She doesn't own a real estate company. She lives in a double-wide trailer in Henderson, Nevada, and she's been on disability for 6 years." The confession hit Jake like a sledgehammer. He stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I made it all up," Madison cried. "The successful business, the lake house, the luxury cars. None of it's true. Mom lives in Sunset Village Mobile Home Park and survives on $800 a month in disability payments." My heart should have felt sympathy for the young woman breaking down at my table, but all I felt was cold anger. For 2 years, she'd used her fabricated family success story to belittle me and make Jake feel ashamed of his modest upbringing. "Why?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible. "Why would you lie about something like that?" Madison looked up, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. "Because I was ashamed. Because when I met you, you talked about your family with so much pride. Your dad's work ethic, your mom's strength, how they'd built a good life together. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be worthy of you. So you decided to tear down my mother instead." Jake's voice was rising, anger replacing shock. "You made me feel like my family wasn't good enough." "I never meant for it to hurt anyone," Madison protested. "I just wanted to feel like I belonged." I stood up slowly, my decision crystallizing like ice, forming on a winter pond. "Well, now you know the truth about both our families. And here's another truth. I'm done subsidizing this dysfunction. You have 30 days to either start paying actual rent to live in my building or find somewhere else to go." Madison's tear-stained face turned toward me with desperation. "Ursula, please. I know I've made mistakes, but I can change. I can be better." "Can you?" I asked. "Because for 18 months you've been taking my financial support while systematically trying to destroy my relationship with my son. You've insulted my cooking, my housekeeping, my deceased husband's memory, and my worth as a woman, all while I was literally paying for your roof." Jake sat in stunned silence, processing the full scope of what had been happening. His wife had been lying about her family while using those lies to attack his mother, who had been secretly supporting them both. "The rent is $1,800 a month," I continued, "due on the 1st. If you can't afford it on Jake's salary, you'll need to find jobs that pay better or a place you can afford." Madison turned to Jake with pleading eyes. "Jake, you have to understand. I was trying to protect my pride. I didn't want you to know I came from nothing." But Jake was looking at her with new eyes, seeing the manipulation behind the tears. "You didn't come from nothing, Madison. You came from a mother who's struggling just like lots of people struggle. That's not shameful. What's shameful is lying about it and using those lies to hurt my family." As I cleared the untouched plates from the table, I felt lighter than I had in months. The truth was finally out, and the choice was now theirs. They could step up and take responsibility for their lives, or they could find another benefactor to deceive and abuse. Either way, I was done being their victim. 3 days after our explosive dinner, Madison launched a campaign to win Jake back to her side. She alternated between tearful apologies and righteous indignation, painting me as a vindictive mother-in-law who was punishing her for a moment of weakness. "Your mother is being cruel and vindictive." She sobbed into Jake's shoulder as he came home from work. "I made one mistake, and she's holding it over our heads like some kind of weapon." But Jake wasn't the same man who'd sat passively through months of insults. The revelation about Madison's lies had awakened something in him, a backbone I hadn't seen since he was 12 years old and stood up to the neighborhood bully. "One mistake," he replied gently but firmly, removing her arms from around his neck. "Madison, you've been lying to me for 2 years, about your family, about your background, about everything." Madison shifted tactics, placing her hand on her still flat stomach with dramatic flair. "Well, I guess none of that matters now anyway, not with the baby coming." Jake froze. "What baby?" I'm pregnant, Madison announced, watching his face carefully for his reaction. I found out yesterday. The doctor says I'm about 6 weeks along. I happened to be visiting that evening bringing Jake some paperwork related to the building lease, and I witnessed this announcement from the hallway where I'd paused unseen. Something about Madison's timing and delivery felt rehearsed, calculated. Are you sure? Jake asked, his anger momentarily replaced by wonder and concern. Positive, Madison replied, producing a pregnancy test from her purse. I know the timing isn't ideal with everything that's happened, but we're going to be parents, Jake. We need to focus on our future, not on past mistakes. Jake's face softened as he stared at the plastic test strip. We're having a baby, he whispered, and I could hear the awe in his voice. Madison pressed her advantage. Which is why your mother's ultimatum is so heartless. How can she threaten to evict a pregnant woman? What kind of grandmother puts her own grandchild at risk over a silly argument? I slipped away before they noticed me, but Madison's words echoed in my mind. The pregnancy announcement felt too convenient, too perfectly timed to derail any consequences for her behavior. My instincts, honed by decades of catching students in lies, were screaming that something wasn't right. The next morning, I decided to help Jake organize his finances so he could budget for the baby's arrival. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Jake's pay stubs from Henderson Auto Parts showed his gross income clearly, $2,400 per month after his recent promotion. But his bank statements told a different story. His checking account deposits were consistently $200 less than his paychecks indicated. Jake, I said carefully, can you explain this discrepancy in your bank deposits? He studied the papers I'd spread across his kitchen table, his brow furrowing in confusion. I don't understand. My pay goes directly into our joint account. Your joint account? Yeah, Madison set it up when we got married. She said it would be easier to manage our bills from one account. A chill ran down my spine. Who has access to this account? Both of us. Madison handles most of the banking because she's better with numbers. I bit back my immediate response and instead suggested we visit the bank together to get copies of all their statements. Jake, still trusting and naive about his wife's capabilities for deception, agreed readily. At First National Bank, my friend Helen worked as a senior teller. She'd helped Frank and me with our real estate transactions for years and knew how to be discreet. When Jake requested copies of his account statements, Helen's expression grew troubled. Jake, I need to ask you something confidentially, Helen said in a low voice. Are you aware that your wife opened a separate savings account here 8 months ago? Jake's face went pale. What separate account? Helen glanced around the bank lobby before continuing. She's been making regular deposits of $200 monthly. The account currently has a balance of $1,600. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Madison had been skimming money from Jake's paychecks for 8 months, essentially stealing from her own household budget while they struggled to pay bills. And there's more, Helen whispered. Last month, she inquired about the process for removing a joint account holder's access. She claimed it was for a friend, but she asked very specific questions about your account. Jake looked like he might be sick. She's been stealing from me. I'm afraid it appears that way, Helen confirmed. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I've been concerned. The questions she asked suggested she might be planning to lock you out of your own account. We left the bank with copies of all the statements, including the secret savings account records. Jake was quiet on the drive home, processing the magnitude of his wife's betrayal. How could I have been so blind? He asked as we sat in my kitchen reviewing the evidence. You loved her, I replied simply. Love makes us want to trust even when our instincts tell us something's wrong. That evening, Jake confronted Madison about the missing money. I wasn't there, but he called me afterward, his voice shaking with rage and hurt. She tried to claim it was medical bills, he told me. Said she'd been having female problems and didn't want to worry me with the details. But when I asked for the bills, she couldn't produce them. What did she say when you told her you knew about the savings account? She broke down crying and admitted she'd been taking the money, but she claimed it was for the baby. said she wanted to surprise me with a nest egg for when the baby came. I felt my detective instincts kicking in. Jake, think carefully about the timeline. You said Helen told you Madison opened that account 8 months ago. Yeah, in April. But Madison just announced she's 6 weeks pregnant. That would mean she started saving for the baby 6 months before she conceived. The silence on the other end of the phone told me Jake was doing the math. Unless, I continued gently, there is no baby. That evening, I decided to test my theory. I called Madison directly, something I rarely did. Hello, Madison. I wanted to apologize for my harsh words the other night. Jake told me about the pregnancy, and I realize I need to be more supportive during this important time. Thank you, Ursula. Madison replied, her voice cautious but hopeful. I know we've had our differences, but I hope we can put them behind us for the baby's sake. Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to help. I've been reading about prenatal nutrition, and I'd love to buy you some good quality vitamins. The baby's development in these early weeks is so crucial. That's very thoughtful, but I already have vitamins. What brand are you taking? I want to make sure you're getting the right amounts of folic acid and iron. Oh, the generic ones from the pharmacy. They're fine. Madison generic vitamins often don't have adequate absorption rates. Let me take you to see my doctor. She specializes in high-risk pregnancies and can recommend the best supplements. High risk? Madison's voice rose slightly. Why would you think this is high risk? Well, with your stress levels from our family situation plus starting a pregnancy while dealing with financial concerns, I just want to make sure you and the baby get the best care. I'm not high risk, Madison protested. I'm perfectly healthy. In fact, I just had a glass of wine to calm my nerves about all this family drama. The words hung in the air like a confession. Pregnant women don't drink alcohol, especially not women who claim to be concerned about their baby's health. Madison, I said quietly, pregnant women shouldn't drink alcohol. I could hear her sharp intake of breath as she realized her mistake. I meant grape juice. I had grape juice. But it was too late. Combined with the suspicious timing of her announcement and her inability to provide medical bills for the money she'd stolen Madison's slip about drinking alcohol, confirmed my suspicions. There was no baby, just another lie in an increasingly complex web of deception. And now I knew I was dealing with someone far more dangerous than an insecure young woman with a tendency to exaggerate. I was dealing with a calculating manipulator who would use anything, even a fake pregnancy, to avoid consequences for her actions. The question was, what else was she capable of? Madison's fake pregnancy announcement bought her exactly 3 days before her alcohol slip exposed the lie. But instead of admitting the deception, she doubled down on an even more dangerous strategy. If she couldn't manipulate Jake through false sympathy, she'd eliminate me from the equation entirely. It started with subtle comments to our neighbors. Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door and had been Frank's bowling partner for 15 years, stopped by with a concerned expression. Ursula, I hope you don't mind me asking, but are you feeling all right lately? Madison mentioned you've been having some memory issues. I set down my teacup carefully. What kind of memory issues? Well, she said you've been forgetting conversations, repeating yourself, getting confused about dates and appointments. She seemed very worried about you. My blood began to simmer. I haven't had any conversations with Madison about memory problems. Mrs. Patterson looked uncomfortable. She said you might not remember them. She's concerned you're showing early signs of dementia like her grandmother did. This was a calculated attack on my reputation and mental capacity designed to make people question my competence. I thanked Mrs. Patterson for her concern and assured her I was perfectly fine, but I knew Madison was just getting started. 2 days later, my friend Carol called with similar concerns. Carol had been a registered nurse for 40 years before retiring and had worked extensively with elderly patients. Ursula, I got a strange call from Madison yesterday. She asked me about the signs of cognitive decline in older adults. She seemed to think you might need professional evaluation. Did she give you specific examples? She mentioned that you've been hiding things from Jake making financial decisions that don't make sense and behaving erratically. She also said you threatened to evict them over a minor disagreement. I realized Madison was cleverly twisting the truth about our rent situation. To an outsider who didn't know the full story, my decision to charge rent after secretly paying it myself might seem like irrational or vindictive behavior. Carol, I need to tell you what's really been happening, I said and proceeded to explain the entire situation. The lies about Madison's family, the money she'd been stealing, and the fake pregnancy. Carol listened in growing alarm. Ursula, this sounds like she's trying to build a case for having you declared incompetent. I've seen this before with elderly patients who have assets that family members want to control. What do you mean? If she can convince a doctor that you're suffering from dementia or cognitive decline, she might be able to get guardianship over you and your finances. It's a form of elder abuse that's more common than people realize. The possibility sent ice through my veins. Frank's real estate portfolio was worth over $3 million. If Madison could gain legal control over my finances, she'd have access to wealth beyond her wildest dreams. What should I do? Document everything. Get a complete medical evaluation from your doctor showing your cognitive state is normal, and be very careful about any medical appointments Madison might try to arrange for you. As if on cue, my phone rang that afternoon. It was Dr. Williams' office calling to confirm my appointment for a cognitive assessment the following Tuesday. I didn't make any appointment, I told the receptionist. Oh, I'm sorry, let me check the notes. It says here that your daughter-in-law, Madison Brennan, called to schedule this evaluation. She expressed concerns about memory issues and confusion. Please cancel that appointment. If I need a cognitive assessment, I'll schedule it myself. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen thinking through Madison's strategy. She was systematically laying groundwork to have me declared mentally incompetent, which would allow her to control my finances and property. The fake pregnancy had been a distraction, but this was her real plan. I called my attorney, Robert Hayes, who had handled Frank's estate planning. Robert, I need to understand my legal vulnerabilities if someone tries to challenge my mental competence. Robert's voice grew serious. Ursula, are you experiencing any cognitive issues? None whatsoever, but my daughter-in-law has been telling people I am, and she tried to schedule a medical evaluation without my knowledge. That's very concerning. In cases where family members seek guardianship over an elderly person's assets, they typically need medical evidence of incapacity. If she's manufacturing that evidence, what can I do to protect myself? First, get a comprehensive evaluation from your own doctor immediately. Make sure it's documented that you're mentally competent. Second, consider updating your estate planning documents to explicitly state your current mental capacity. Third, if you suspect elder abuse, we may need to involve authorities. That evening, my tenant, Mrs. Rodriguez, called with information that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Brennan, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I saw something today that worried me. That young woman, your son's wife, was in the building this afternoon, using keys to enter your office downstairs. My office was in the basement of my apartment building where I kept files related to all my properties. It should have been locked accessible only to me and my property manager. Did you see what she was doing? She was carrying a box when she left. She looked around, real careful-like, before she went in like she didn't want anyone to see her. I thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and immediately went to check my office. The lock hadn't been broken, which meant Madison had somehow obtained a key. Inside, my filing cabinet had been rifled through. Several folders were missing, including property deeds, bank statements, and copies of Frank's will. Madison was gathering documentation about my assets while building a case for my supposed mental incapacity. The scope of her plan was becoming terrifyingly clear. I called Jake immediately. I need you to come over right now. Don't tell Madison where you're going. When Jake arrived 20 minutes later, I showed him the security footage Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned. Our building had cameras in the common areas, and sure enough, there was Madison entering my office with a key and leaving with a file box. Where would she get a key to your office? Jake asked, staring at the footage in disbelief. That's what we need to find out. Jake, I think your wife is planning something much worse than stealing money from your paycheck. I think she's trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so she can control my finances. Jake's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, anger, and finally, a grim understanding. The pregnancy announcement, the concerns about your memory, the doctor's appointment she tried to schedule, it's all part of the same plan. She's been laying groundwork to paint me as a confused, irrational old woman who needs professional care. That night, Jake confronted Madison about the missing files. She claimed she'd been trying to help organize my paperwork because she was worried about my ability to manage my affairs properly. When he pressed her about the key, she said she'd found it in a drawer and thought she was being helpful. But Jake was no longer the trusting husband he'd been a week earlier. He demanded she return the files immediately and surrender the key. Madison's response chilled me to the bone when Jake relayed it later. Your mother is getting old and confused. Someone needs to look out for her interests before she makes decisions that hurt the whole family. The battle lines were drawn. Madison wasn't just trying to avoid paying rent anymore. She was mounting a comprehensive campaign to take control of everything Frank and I had built together. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated a retired high school principal's ability to recognize manipulation and gather evidence. I'd spent 30 years dealing with teenagers who thought they could outsmart the system. Madison was about to learn that experience beats youth every single time. With Carol's nursing background and my decades of dealing with deceptive teenagers, we devised a strategy that would give Madison enough rope to hang herself. I would pretend to be exactly what she was claiming I was, a confused, mentally declining elderly woman who needed help managing her affairs. The performance began immediately. When Madison visited the next evening, ostensibly to apologize for taking my files, I greeted her with exaggerated confusion. "Oh, hello, dear. I'm sorry, remind me of your name again. I meet so many people these days, and they all start to blend together." Madison's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. "It's Madison Ursula, your daughter-in-law, Jake's wife." Jake's wife. But I thought Jake was still in high school. I looked around my living room with feigned bewilderment. Where is Jake anyway? Shouldn't he be home for dinner? "Jake is 38 years old now, Ursula. He's at work at the auto parts store, remember?" I nodded slowly as if trying to process difficult information. "Oh yes, of course. The auto parts store. Sometimes I get confused about what year it is." Over the next week, I continued the charade whenever Madison was around. I pretended to forget conversations we'd just had, repeated myself frequently, and acted confused about basic details of my own life. Madison ate it up, encouraging my supposed confusion while carefully documenting each incident. What Madison didn't know was that I'd hidden Frank's old digital recorder in my purse. Every conversation, every manipulation, every calculating comment was being captured on audio. The breakthrough came when Madison grew confident enough to reveal her true intentions to Jake, believing I was too mentally compromised to understand or remember. "Your mother is getting worse every day," she told Jake while I sat in my armchair pretending to doze. "Yesterday, she asked me 3 times what year it was. She's clearly not capable of managing millions of dollars in property anymore." "What are you suggesting?" Jake asked, though I could hear the wariness in his voice. "I've been researching guardianship procedures. If we can get a doctor to certify that she's mentally incompetent, we can petition the court to let us manage her finances. It would be for her own protection." "Madison, that's my mother you're talking about." Jake, think about it logically. She owns 12 properties worth over $3 million. If she starts making bad decisions because of her condition, your entire inheritance could be at risk. We'd be protecting your family's future. Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. It feels wrong to go behind her back." "It's not going behind her back, it's looking out for her best interests. And honestly, Jake, we could use the income from those properties. My mother always said family should take care of family." There it was, recorded proof that Madison was planning to exploit my supposed mental decline for financial gain. But I needed more evidence to build an unshakable case. The next day, I called Dr. Williams myself and scheduled a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. I want complete documentation of my mental status, I told him. Include memory tests, reasoning assessments, everything you can think of. Dr. Williams was puzzled. Ursula, you seem perfectly sharp to me. Is there a reason you're concerned about cognitive decline? Let's just say I want official documentation of my mental competence for legal purposes. The evaluation took 3 hours and covered everything from basic memory tests to complex problem-solving exercises. Dr. Williams concluded that my cognitive function was excellent for someone of any age, let alone a woman of 65. Your scores are in the 95th percentile across all categories, he told me. Your memory, reasoning, and mental flexibility are all outstanding. I'd be happy to provide written documentation of these results. Meanwhile, I discovered that Madison had been busier than I'd realized. My banker friend Helen called with disturbing news. Ursula Madison came in again yesterday asking about your accounts. This time she brought forms claiming to be power of attorney documents. She wanted to add herself as an authorized user on all your accounts. I never signed any power of attorney documents. I know. That's why I refused to process them. But the paperwork looked quite official. She may have had them professionally forged. The audacity was breathtaking. Madison was creating fake legal documents while building a case for my mental incompetence. If her plan worked, she'd gain control of assets that Frank and I had spent decades accumulating. But my investigation revealed an even more shocking truth. I hired a private investigator to research Madison's background, and what he found made my hands shake as I read his report. Madison's real name was Madison Torres, not Madison Morrison, as she'd claimed. She'd been arrested twice in Nevada for fraud and identity theft. In Las Vegas, she'd convinced an elderly widower to give her power of attorney, then emptied his bank accounts and disappeared. The charges were dropped when the man died before the trial, but the pattern was unmistakable. In Reno, she'd targeted a recently divorced businessman claiming to be pregnant with his child while systematically stealing from his business accounts. She'd been banned from 2 cities and had outstanding warrants for check fraud. Jake wasn't her first victim. He was part of a long pattern of financial predators who specialized in exploiting vulnerable people through romantic relationships and family connections. Armed with this information, I arranged one final test. I called Jake and Madison for what I claimed would be an important family discussion about my future care needs. I've been thinking about what you said, Madison, about needing help with my finances. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need someone younger and sharper to handle things. Madison's face practically glowed with triumph. I think that's very wise, Ursula. Jake and I are happy to help however we can. I was thinking we could set up some kind of arrangement where you handle the day-to-day management of the properties. Nothing too complicated, just collecting rent and paying bills. That sounds perfect, Madison said eagerly. I have experience with financial management from helping my mother with her business. Even now, she was maintaining the fiction about her successful family. The woman was incapable of telling the truth about anything. There's just one thing. I continued, pulling out a manila folder. I'll need you to sign some paperwork first. Just basic liability forms, tax documents, that sort of thing. Madison barely glanced at the papers before signing them eagerly. What she didn't realize was that she'd just signed a confession admitting to theft of money from Jake's accounts, acknowledging that she'd lied about her pregnancy, and stating that she'd taken files from my office without permission. The document was carefully worded to look like routine property management paperwork, but every line contained an admission of her criminal behavior. As Madison handed back the signed papers, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Thank you, dear. This will be very helpful. The trap was set. Madison had provided me with recorded confessions, signed admissions of guilt, and documented evidence of her criminal history. All I needed now was the right moment to spring it. That moment came sooner than expected when my phone rang at 6 the next morning. It was Officer Davis from the County Sheriff's Department. Mrs. Brennan, I hate to bother you so early, but I'm calling about a report filed by your daughter-in-law. She claims you've been threatening her with a weapon and making statements about harming yourself and others. Madison had just made the biggest mistake of her criminal career. She'd involved law enforcement in her scheme, which meant everything was about to become a matter of public record. "Officer Davis," I said calmly, "I think you need to hear the other side of this story." Officer Davis arrived at my house within an hour, accompanied by Detective Sarah Martinez, who specialized in elder abuse cases. Madison had called them at 5 in the morning, claiming I'd threatened her with a kitchen knife and made statements about not wanting to live anymore. "Mrs. Brennan," Officer Davis began carefully, "we take these reports very seriously, especially when they involve elderly residents and potential domestic violence." "I understand completely, officer. But before we discuss Madison's claims, there are some things you need to know about her background and what's really been happening here." I presented them with the private investigator's report, the audio recordings, Madison's signed confession, and Dr. Williams' cognitive evaluation. Detective Martinez studied the documents with growing interest. "This is quite a collection of evidence," she said. "Are you claiming that your daughter-in-law has been systematically defrauding you?" "I'm saying she's been running a long-term confidence scheme designed to gain control of my assets by having me declared mentally incompetent. The threats she reported this morning are fabricated." Officer Davis looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, those are serious accusations. We'll need to investigate thoroughly before drawing any conclusions." "I understand. But I think you should also know that there are outstanding warrants for Madison Torres in Nevada. She's been using a false identity here." Detective Martinez's eyebrows rose. "Madison Torres. That's her real name. She's wanted for fraud in Las Vegas and Reno. I have the documentation right here." As the officers reviewed the evidence, my doorbell rang. It was Madison, accompanied by Jake, arriving for what she thought would be my arrest and removal from my own home. Madison's face went white when she saw the police cars in my driveway, but she quickly composed herself and approached with a concerned expression. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. I was so worried after Ursula's behavior last night. Is she getting the help she needs?" Detective Martinez stepped forward. "Ma'am, are you Madison Brennan?" "Yes, I'm Madison Brennan. I'm the one who called about my mother-in-law's threats." "Actually, our records show you as Madison Torres. Would you like to explain the discrepancy?" The color drained completely from Madison's face. She glanced frantically between the officers and me, realizing that her carefully constructed identity was crumbling. "I don't know what you mean," she stammered. "My name is Madison Brennan. I've been Madison Brennan since I married Jake 2 years ago." Detective Martinez pulled out a tablet and showed Madison her own photograph from the Nevada warrant database. "This is you, correct? Madison Elena Torres, wanted for fraud and identity theft in Clark County, Nevada." Jake stared at his wife in shock. "Torres Madison, what is she talking about?" Madison's composure finally shattered completely. "I can explain everything. Yes, Torres is my maiden name, but the charges in Nevada were all misunderstandings. I never hurt anyone." "What about the elderly man in Las Vegas whose accounts you emptied?" I asked quietly. "Harold Simpson, 83 years old. You convinced him you were his long-lost granddaughter." Madison's eyes filled with tears, but they looked calculated rather than genuine. "He wanted to help me. He said I reminded him of his real granddaughter." "And the businessman in Reno whose business accounts you drained while claiming to be pregnant with his child?" "That was different. He was abusive. I was protecting myself." Officer Davis stepped forward with handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and filing a false police report. You have the right to remain silent." As the handcuffs clicked around Madison's wrists, she turned to Jake with desperate eyes. "Jake, don't let them do this. Tell them I'm a good person. Tell them I love you." But Jake was staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You lied about everything. Your name, your family, the pregnancy, stealing from my paycheck. Everything." "I did it for us," Madison cried as Officer Davis led her toward the patrol car. "I wanted to build a good life for us. Your mother never understood that." "My mother was paying our rent," Jake replied, his voice hollow with realization. "She was supporting us while you were stealing from me and planning to steal from her." As the police car pulled away with Madison in the back seat, Jake collapsed into one of my porch chairs. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you." Detective Martinez stayed behind to complete her report. "Mrs. Brennan, you've provided excellent documentation of what appears to be a sophisticated elder abuse scheme. The recordings alone are enough to support multiple felony charges. What happens now? Madison will be held pending extradition to Nevada for the outstanding warrants. Additionally, she'll face charges here for fraud, theft, identity, theft, elder abuse, conspiracy, and filing false police reports. With her history and the evidence you've provided, she's looking at significant prison time." After the detective left, Jake and I sat on my porch in stunned silence. The morning sun was warming, the air birds were singing in my oak tree, and the nightmare was finally over. "I feel like such a fool," Jake said quietly. 2 years of my life with someone who was basically a stranger." "You're not a fool," I replied. "You loved someone who presented herself as worthy of love. The person you fell for doesn't actually exist, but your capacity for love is real. How can you forgive me for letting her treat you the way she did?" I reached over and took his hand. "Because you're my son and because you're going to learn from this experience. Sometimes the most important lessons come from our biggest mistakes." As we sat together watching the morning unfold, I realized that Madison's scheme had actually accomplished something positive. It had forced Jake to find his backbone and me to remember my own strength. Frank would have been proud of how I'd handled the situation. More importantly, I was proud of myself. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Madison Torres receive her sentence. She'd pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, elder abuse conspiracy, and filing false police reports. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Walsh, had reviewed the extensive evidence, including my recordings, the forged documents, and Madison's criminal history across 3 states. "Ms. Torres," Judge Walsh said sternly, "your pattern of targeting vulnerable individuals through romantic relationships and family connections represents a particularly callous form of predatory behavior. You've shown no remorse for your actions and continue to blame your victims for your criminal choices." Madison stood with her court-appointed attorney wearing an orange jumpsuit and looking nothing like the confident manipulator who'd once insulted my cooking. The federal prosecutor had painted a devastating picture of her criminal career, revealing that she'd targeted at least 7 victims across Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado before arriving in our town. "The court sentences you to 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will also pay full restitution to your victims, including Mrs. Brennan and her son Jake." As the bailiff led Madison away, she turned one last time toward the gallery where Jake and I sat. Her eyes held no apology, no recognition of the pain she'd caused. Even now, I could see her calculating mind, working, probably already planning her next scheme for when she got out of prison. Jake squeezed my hand as we left the courthouse. "It's really over," he said. "This chapter is over," I corrected. "Now we get to write the next one." The months following Madison's arrest had been a period of healing and rebuilding for both Jake and me. He'd moved back into his childhood bedroom temporarily while sorting through the wreckage of his marriage and deciding what he wanted to do with his life. The divorce had been swift and final. Since their marriage was based on Madison's fraudulent identity, Jake's attorney argued successfully that the entire union was legally invalid. Madison had no claim to any assets, and Jake was free to start over. More importantly, Jake had begun the hard work of understanding how he'd been manipulated and making sure it never happened again. He started seeing a counselor who specialized in helping victims of romantic fraud, and he threw himself into learning about the family business. "Mom," he said one evening as we reviewed the books for our 12 properties, "I want to earn my place in this business. Not because I'm your son, but because I can actually contribute something valuable." I'd been hoping he'd show this kind of initiative, but I wanted to make sure his motivations were genuine. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to start at the bottom. Let me be your maintenance coordinator for 6 months. I'll handle repairs, tenant issues, and property inspections. If I prove I can do the job well, then we can talk about expanding my responsibilities. Jake worked harder over the next 6 months than I'd ever seen him work at anything. He learned plumbing, basic electrical work, and property management software. He developed relationships with reliable contractors and created a system for tracking maintenance requests that was more efficient than anything Frank and I had ever used. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been so helpful during the Madison crisis, became one of Jake's biggest supporters. "Your son is a good man," she told me. "He fixes things right the first time and he treats people with respect." By Christmas, Jake had proven himself capable of managing half our properties independently. We officially made him a partner in Frank and Ursula Brennan Properties, LLC, with a 25% stake that would grow to 50% over the next 5 years. The financial recovery exceeded my expectations. Madison's restitution payments would continue for years, but we'd already recovered the $1,600 she'd stolen from Jake's paychecks, plus interest. More importantly, the properties Madison had tried to steal were generating enough income to support both Jake and me comfortably. Mrs. Rodriguez received a permanent 50% reduction in her rent as thanks for her help during the crisis. Several other longtime tenants received smaller reductions because they'd provided information that helped build the case against Madison. The most satisfying moment came when I received a letter from Harold Simpson, the elderly man Madison had defrauded in Las Vegas. His family had learned about her conviction and reached out to thank me for ensuring she faced justice. "Because of your courage in exposing her crimes," his daughter wrote, "my father will recover most of the money she stole from him. More importantly, seeing her held accountable has helped him heal from the emotional trauma of being betrayed by someone he trusted." Jake had started dating again, but this time he was taking things slowly and had introduced me to Sarah early in their relationship. Sarah worked as a teacher at the elementary school and came from a stable family I'd known for years. Most importantly, she treated both Jake and me with genuine kindness and respect. "I've learned to recognize red flags," Jake told me. "Sarah encourages my relationship with you instead of trying to drive a wedge between us. She asks questions about my life instead of making up stories about hers. She pays for her own meals instead of expecting me to support her." The monthly family dinners resumed, but now they were peaceful, honest conversations between people who genuinely cared about each other. Sarah often joined us, contributing homemade bread or desserts and asking thoughtful questions about family stories and traditions. One Sunday evening, as we finished dinner and Sarah helped clear the table, Jake raised his glass of iced tea. "I want to propose a toast," he said, "to Mom for teaching me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is forcing them to face the consequences of their actions." I felt tears gathering in my eyes as I raised my own glass. "And to you for having the courage to rebuild your life based on truth instead of comfortable lies." Sarah smiled and added, "To families that choose to love each other through honesty instead of manipulation." As we sat together in my dining room, the same room where Madison had once declared I wasn't half the woman her mother was, I reflected on the journey we'd all taken. Frank's properties continued generating income that would support our family for generations. Jake had found his purpose and his backbone, and I'd rediscovered my own strength and worth. The most important lesson I'd learned was about the difference between enabling and supporting. For months, I'd enabled Madison's abuse by absorbing it silently and continuing to subsidize her lifestyle. True support meant holding people accountable for their choices while offering them opportunities to grow and improve. Jake had needed to face the consequences of choosing a manipulative partner over his family's well-being. I'd needed to face the consequences of allowing myself to be disrespected in my own home. Only by confronting these hard truths could we build something better. Now, as I watched Jake manage his portion of our properties with skill and integrity, I know Frank would be proud of the legacy we're building together. The real estate empire he started with that first duplex has become a foundation for honest work, financial security, and family unity. Madison Torres is serving her time in federal prison, where I hope she'll eventually find the motivation to change her destructive patterns. But whether she does or not, her scheme ultimately failed. Instead of destroying our family and stealing our assets, she inadvertently forced us to become stronger, smarter, and more united than we'd ever been before. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the greatest growth. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down end up building you up instead. And sometimes the woman they claim you're not even half of turns out to be exactly the woman you needed to become. Have you ever had to deal with someone who tried to manipulate or take advantage of your kindness? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more tales of justice, resilience, and family strength. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself is always worth it, no matter how difficult it might seem at the time. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you are worth more than anyone who tries to diminish you will ever understand. Trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and never let anyone convince you that your kindness is a weakness to be exploited. Until next time, may your own journey be filled with the courage to demand the respect you deserve and the wisdom to recognize the difference between those who lift you up and those who tear you down.